Special thank you to our sponsor, iGenX. iGenX isn't just a small business. It's a powerhouse ally ready to tackle your agency's toughest tech challenges head on. Specializing in low-code, no-code solutions, advanced analytics, and project management, iGenX is your go-to partner for both federal and commercial projects. But what sets iGenX apart? As a Salesforce Summit-level partner, the company brings unparalleled expertise across the entire Salesforce ecosystem. From MuleSoft and Einstein and Tableau, the expert teams at iGenX don't just build solutions, they engineer them, crafting robust data pipelines and creating stunning visualizations that drive real results. At iGenX, success isn't just a goal, it's a promise. The team is dedicated to delivering measurable benefits that transform your operations. Ready to partner with iGenX? Contact the team at info@igenx.com, spelled info@eigenx.com.
A lot of small businesses combine the roles.
Oh,
A lot
yeah.
of small businesses have BD and capture in the same person. And that's okay as long as the person knows when to put on each hat,
Right.
and combining the activities won't help with the ability to increase the probability of win.
Welcome to GovCom Unfiltered, where your journey through the labyrinth of federal contracting begins. I'm Alexa Choi, your guide and host on this epic adventure. Here, we dive deep into the heart of government contracting, shedding light on the heroic tales of those who navigate its complex terrain. Our mission? To bring you closer to the action, revealing the critical steps, triumphant victories, and occasional pitfalls that our intrepid adventurers face. Your journey into the world of government contracting starts now, and we could not be happier to have you with us. Let's embark on this adventure together.
Thank you for tuning in to GovCom Unfiltered. Today we are talking to Debi McGhee, General Manager of Capture for Red Team Consulting. Debi, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Alexa. This is a great opportunity for me to talk about capture and my experience in the field.
Yes, and it's funny because capture is one of those terms where it's like the Princess Bride, where I'm like, I don't think that term means what you think it means. And if everybody could just come to consensus on what the term means, that would be great. But unfortunately, there's a lot of malarkey going around about that particular term. So that's why I was so excited to talk to you today. Maybe we could land on some definitions, some defining terms, and those things that would be, I think it would be really valuable.
Sure, happy to do that. And I think it's misunderstood, but I also think that a lot of people don't even know what capture is
Oh,
or
yeah.
that it should be done. So happy to talk about it.
Oh boy, this is going to be a good convo. So first of all, I guess first question is, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get to where you are today? Like what steps, what was your path?
Sure. Not a straight line at all. I started in government consulting, giving away my age a little bit, but back in the late 1980s, and I was responsible for systems implementation, delivery for Environmental Protection Agency clients, working for a small environmental consultancy. And I do have a background in writing. I was a journalism major. And so, of course, I was asked to write proposals and moved into writing proposals, and I liked it. It's shocking. And so then my career grew, and I became director of proposal organization. And my company was acquired, and then I was asked to be in the larger company's proposal organization, ended up running that organization as well. And so I left the big corporate behemoth to work for smaller companies. And I really enjoyed that more and ran and helped those smaller companies learn how to grow and compete in the full and open world when they were no longer small. And that led to more capture activities than just proposal.
Oh, yeah.
And so I did that. I helped 3 different companies grow and be able to compete in full and open, and then kind of decided to go out on my own and be a consultant for those companies. And did that for a few years, and now I'm with Red Team Consulting and helping Red Team grow.
Wow. It's funny that you bring up that tipping point between, the smalls and the larges and that like no man's land. I think I was reading an article on LinkedIn today calling it the Goldilocks, which is making me kind of laugh. But it really is a paradigm shift when you go from competing in small business to competing in mid-market against large businesses, right?
It's hard. It's really hard because you find yourself competing against other companies who are about your same size, 25 to 40 million.
Right.
And then when you grow out of that small business category, you're competing against 200, 500 million, billion-dollar companies who have way more resources than you do. And so it's a big challenge. And a lot of companies struggle with it.
And I think you kind of already gave a spoiler alert, which I loved, but the answer was more capture, which
Yeah.
is might not be what everybody thinks. So all right. So I think I'm gonna skip the second question and move on to the third one because it's more exciting. What do you like most about the capture role itself? Like which parts do you like most?
So I like, there's a lot of activities in capture,
Right.
from figuring out your company's capability gaps, determining if you need a team, determining who your competition is and doing competitive analysis, figuring out what your price to win is, developing your win strategy. Why are we gonna win? My favorite part is actually the fact that all of these steps, everything you're doing increases your probability of win. So you don't do capture activities just to check a process box. You don't do something just to say, okay, that's done, put it on the shelf. Everything you do in capture helps you win the work, and everything builds on everything else. It's like peeling back an onion. There are layers, you find out more, and you add that to your cadre, and then that helps you get more information, and then you win, and then you find out more. And so everything about the capture process should be, if it's done right, helping your probability of win. So that's the part of it that I like.
Right. And that makes sense. Yeah. I think the question of how do we get to a win, even though it's very basic and kind of obvious, could be something that's overlooked through, the activities that you have to do, right? But that's probably the crux of the question and should be in the step reviews, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Are you doing all of those things to help, as they say, influence the opportunity if you're out there ahead of time? Are you talking to your customers? Are you talking to your competitors? Do you have the right people? Do you have the right key personnel? All of those things help your ability to win.
So this question is not on the list, and sorry, this happens sometimes when I come up with a question on the fly. So I hear that a lot, like, oh, we should have been in there influencing stuff, and and you and I both know that that's a pipe dream for a lot of companies because it's just not how the federal procurement process works, right? Most of the time. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but that's why people tie their delivery people in with growth goals because they're like, oh, well, you're closest to the work, so you can do the shaping. I get it. I really do. But my question is this, it's not really related to that as closely as you might think. But if you have past performance and you have work within one agency and you want to get work at a different agency, that kind of past performance is very much aligned, but you haven't been able to shape the deal, what would you recommend companies do?
Well, at a minimum, try to get in and talk to the customer.
Right.
That's kind of the first thing is really, if you can get into the customer ahead of time, and this doesn't have to be 18 months, it could be
Right.
2 months, it could be, 30 days before the RFP comes out. The customer should know who you are and at least have a sense that you have the capability to do the work. So at a minimum, meet with the customer and not just present your qual statement, or you're not doing a PowerPoint, you're having a conversation. It's all about relationship building, and it's all about, making sure the customer understands what you can bring to the table and that you've got innovative ideas or a new way to do the business they've been doing for years. Maybe you've got a new way, and that new way is not AI. we'll leave that for another podcast. But maybe you have a new idea that this customer will then go, oh, that's a good idea. Oh, I'm looking forward to seeing their proposal. So minimum, try to get in and talk to the customer.
So another barrier to entry with that thought process is that the customer is not the contracting officer, right? And it's much easier
Correct.
to get in front of the contracting officer than it is to get in front of the program office.
Yeah.
So what are some of the kind of recommendations you could give for figuring out who the customer is, the program office, and how to get in front of them in time to kind of develop that relationship and that trust?
Yeah. So, start with the organization's org chart and
Right.
really look at who is responsible for what. And you can figure out who the decision makers are. Now, some of the decision makers may be too senior in the organization. And so you want to get further down. And so this is hard in this post-COVID era where people aren't walking the halls of the government offices and you have to actually pick up the phone or do a Teams meeting or Zoom. But get a friend to introduce you, attend conferences, attend even a lot of agencies have networking events. Some agencies put on tech days where you can attend and all the contractors show off what they do. So really try to get in and meet somebody. Call a friend who knows somebody there and get in. I mean, this gets back to what I was just saying about getting in front of the customer. But then you can learn more about what that customer needs, and you can think about how what you bring to the table can meet those needs. Past performance with the other agency will be very relevant, but won't be if nobody knows who you are and what you do. So you've got to kind of get in there.
Right. And this leads me to one of my favorite talking points, especially of late, is that BD and capture are two different roles, right?
Absolutely.
If the BD person was good to read a book on like a self-improvement book, it would be like Winning Friends and Influence. And if the capture person was reading a book, it would be The Art of War, right? So like those are two different things, like two very specifically different things. And so do you agree with me on that point?
I do. I agree that capture and business development, a little bit more akin to sales. It's getting in there, finding out what's happening, finding out what those opportunities are that are coming, looking at the agency's acquisition forecast. And those kinds of things are business development activities to identify potential opportunities to go after. Then capture comes in to really validate that those opportunities can be won and by your company. And what the capture person does is really dig much deeper into those opportunities in finding out, if it's not brand new work, finding out what did the solicitation look like last time? Can we do that? What were the evaluation criteria? Do we have the right people with the right certifications? All of that kind of thing are capture activities, as opposed to just finding those opportunities to go after. So I think there is a very big difference. A lot of small businesses combine the roles. A lot of small businesses have BD and capture in the same person. And that's okay as long as the person knows when to put on each hat, and combining the activities won't help with the ability to increase the probability of win. You've got to be very specific in what you're doing when. But I do think they are two very different roles.
Yeah, I think my challenge with the industry as a whole is that if you're very good at one, you will not be very good at the other. Just because of the personality sets, right? One is building the pipeline, getting in front of the customer, voice of the customer, landscape of what's going on. And that really is like this outgoing person that's at events, you know, building the personal branding, which then becomes the
Right.
company branding, right? And doing all that on the front end, but then the capture person is so much more tactical of like teaming and win themes and strategy. And so
Yeah.
I always, through my own experiences as well, you know, have just try to give the advice that like, you know, listen, you're not going to want the same person to do the same role.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that there's a lot of research and a lot of heads down activity for the capture manager as opposed to out there networking for the BD person. Is if small companies had to choose, they should choose a capture manager. Now, yes, I'm the general manager of capture, but business development is also akin to delivery.
Right.
And there are, people who are delivering the work are meeting with the customers every day.
Right.
They have their ear to the ground. They know what's coming up with this particular customer. They even know what's coming up with this customer stakeholders, which
Right.
might be other agencies that you want to get into. And so, err on the side of the people who have the ability to get in front of the customer and then have a separate role, a separate person for capture.
Federal proposals, your voice, less time, exceptional results. Voltron gives you the power of custom language models to reduce proposal development costs by 54% and start to finish submission time by 63%. Voltron is the only AI platform that synthesizes the valuable business development and capture information you obtain to write high-quality compliant proposal content specific to your company and each solicitation. Stop throwing it over the fence. Schedule a demo today at vultron.ai.
I love this conversation. It's such a nerdy, like tactical, like it's about like putting things together. It's great. Yeah, I have recently been doing a lot of talking about having, you know, the operations folks, the doer seller model, you know, that some of the bigger consulting firms kind of like started, and it's trickled down to small businesses as well. And then the outside growth team, right? And I think a lot of companies consider those two different models, but I feel like it works best when they're the same model, but it's all in the communication and how outcomes are really tracked. And so, yeah, it's never
growth teams should have the voice of the customer, but also the voice of the operations folks of, can we really do this work? The program manager needs to be involved. If you've got a capture manager, the capture manager doesn't do everything themselves. They have a capture team. And part of the capture team should be the program manager or the people who are doing the work, either for this customer to get more work or in that technical space. If it's, if it's software development, you've got to have a technical person who understands the work that we're, trying to capture. And so it should be, the model should have all the components together,
right.
which is hard. And a lot of companies are not set up like that.
Right. I was on a meeting yesterday where, you know, the question was, who do you hire first? Right? Like, who would be your first hire? And this person's perspective was they would hire a solutions architect because you can task that person with doing all of the roles, which, I mean, I was like, that's an interesting point, but do you really want your solutions architect being your BD person? I mean,
yeah, I think that the solution architect can do a lot of the research needed for capture, can do some of the writing needed for proposals. I think it would be challenging for a solution architect to be the BD person. Just because they're, the solution architects I know would much rather be in front of their computer than in front of, a room of 100 people. So my experience, but that's not a bad, hiring the solution architect first isn't a bad approach.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. And I also think it kind of depends on the company as well. Because if you're a managing consulting company, then probably
not. Yeah.
But if you're a technical company, then it would be a utility player. And that would be
absolutely.
probably, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I just think that right now there's a lot of talk about this exact thing about how to structure correctly. And you see these roles kind of come up out of nowhere. So for example, the chief growth officer. Like that is something I've only seen in the last maybe 2 years. And it's kind of new. So what are your thoughts about the chief growth officer role? And what does it all encompass? Does it encompass proposal ops as well as delivery? Or are they on an island by themselves? Like what are some of the best practices?
So the companies that I've worked with, a chief growth officer has everything but the back end HR stuff and operations. So the chief growth officer typically has the business development, capture, proposal organization, sometimes the contracting and pricing organization. They also have solution architects in some companies. Other companies I've worked with, the solution architects sit within the business lines in operations.
Right.
But typically, the chief growth officer has the responsibility to grow the company. And growing the company takes all of those different components. But there isn't a reporting relationship, but there's definitely a dotted line to the chief operating officer who has the operations folks or the business lines. But yeah, chief growth officer, I've seen it a little bit more than 2 years in the larger companies. In the small and mid-sized companies, typically there is not a chief growth, that's the CEO. I mean, it's the person who started the company and not necessarily a separate entity,
Right.
because that person is also overhead,
Right.
often very senior. And so you've got to win a lot of work to pay for a chief growth officer. So it's very typical in a larger company.
Yeah, that's why I was surprised to see it start popping up for all these small businesses. I was just like, what are we, no one, are you all competitive on your wrap rates? Like, what's happening?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I have another question for you, and I'm sorry, we kind of went on a tangent away from the questions that I had
It's
written.
okay.
But this question is, what is your opinion on in the step reviews? Do you think operations should have a vote?
Good question. I think that, yes, the operations folks should have a vote because they're the ones that are going to have to do the work that we're proposing. And if we cannot create a proposal that has the right people at the right levels, if our staffing plan doesn't allow for the operations folks to actually do the work, they need to weigh in on that. If we are bidding an agile management approach, but that's not how they currently operate, they need to say, are we changing the way we operate to match what the proposal says? So I do think the operations folks or the business lines need to weigh in. Absolutely.
So then how do you balance the BD capture folks being like the dealer, like they're always in, don't bet against the house, that kind of thing, with the kind of like wet blanket of the operations who are going to always be like, nah, this looks risky. I don't think we should.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you have that like push and pull. And so how do we actually get to a place that, like, how do you get to what makes sense?
Some of the gate reviews and the decision making has to go a little bit beyond the risk and risk mitigation. You always need to say, here's what we're proposing, here's the risks, here's what it's going to cost if there's some additional costs involved other than just regular operations, like you have to build a new tool or something like that. But I think that beyond the risk, there's got to be, does this contribute to our strategic plan? This is where the chief growth officer comes in and the other people around the table of, is this furthering a goal that we have to get into a new agency or to grow exponentially work we have with this one customer? If we go after this bid, it's going to be 3 times as large with this customer. So I do think that it's not just the BD capture and the operations people making the decisions. That's why you've got all the rest of the people around the table.
And you bring up a really good point that I was also talking about yesterday in the meeting I was in, thinking about this. It's like, really, you have to have a strategy, like a 3 to 5 year strategy about what it is we're doing here. Because if we're going to be a lifestyle company and we're going to try to stay under the small business thresholds, that is a plan and you should execute accordingly. If you're going to become a growth oriented organization that's going to pivot from small to large and you have 3 years left on your 8A, that is a strategy. Like you have to,
Yeah.
but not knowing what the strategy is and not knowing the company that you are today versus the company that you want to be, you can't answer any of these questions.
Right. And so that's why all of your business development, your pipeline, your capture activities need to be aligned with whatever your goals are. And
Right.
those goals need to be communicated to the people who are doing the work, or meaning not, well, the operations folks should know the goals too, but specifically the BD and capture folks should know. Because if you typically do work for all the federal civilian agencies and you're a lifestyle company, you're not going to go after big work in DoD.
Right.
But you may have a BD person who's used to doing DoD stuff and they're gung-ho, and you say, well, wait a second, that's not part of the goal of our company. And so you really do need to make sure they match or map each other.
Yeah. Absolutely. I really appreciate you putting it that way. I started laughing when you said the word communicate because it seems so obvious. Like, I don't know that people are great mind readers. I mean, I know I'm not.
I'm certainly not.
Yeah, it's knowing the things and then communicating the things is really
So important.
90% of the battle right there.
Yeah.
90.
It's very
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I have a really good question for you. What would be 3 takeaways you would give somebody to become a better capture manager?
So one thing is what I have been talking about earlier is make sure that everything that you're doing contributes to a greater probability of win. So that you're not just checking boxes, that you're just making sure that everything you do gets more information, peels back the onion, figures out some new thing about this opportunity, and that will contribute to the win. Another thing is be flexible, be ready to pivot if you learn something that was surprising or shocking. As you're digging in to get more information about this opportunity, you find out that it's going to become a small business set aside. And we don't have plan B. So be flexible and create a plan B. And maybe that's just a rumor. Maybe you got 3 other sources to tell you that, and it's really going to happen. But make sure that you have another path to go down if the draft RFP or the final RFP comes out in a way that you weren't expecting.
Right.
The third thing is to communicate. And we just, you led the witness there, but it really is, in communicating, you were talking about the BD and capture people coming up against the operations people, but also you have the proposal team, and it's like a 3-legged stool. You've got, BD and capture, you've got operations, your program manager, and your proposal team, and you've got to communicate everything you've learned during the capture phases to the proposal team, or your probability of win won't be there because they won't have the information. So communicate all the way throughout the process, not just when you're transitioning from capture to proposal. If the company is capable of identifying a proposal manager or a proposal team earlier than when the RFP comes out, if you can communicate that earlier, the earlier the better.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of a blue team. Big fan.
Yes, long before the RFP comes out.
Long before, right?
Right.
Get all the pieces in a row.
Mhm.
I guess I had a question that came out of those 3 pieces, which were great. And the question is, at what point, I think it ties to your second one, right? Like, be flexible. At what point do you no bid? At what point do you pull the plug?
Sure. It's a tough decision. Sometimes you have to wait until the final RFP comes out.
Oh, yeah.
because there are some questions that you just couldn't get answered, and you've got to see the final thing. And, even if you've spent the past 6, 8, 12, 14 months doing capture, and it is time spent, so resources have been allocated and spent, when the final RFP comes out, you might not be able to bid, and so you make a no bid at that point. You can also make a no bid decision earlier on when you get information that shows that you just can't do this. And even if you bring on teammates,
Right.
if there are requirements for the prime, if the prime has to provide past performance that totals $10 million, in the past 2 years, and you just can't show that, and you can't use subcontractor past performance, that's a decision point. So it's really based on the data that you're gathering. It isn't a spot in time. It's not a 2 months, 3 months before RFP. It's based on the data that you're gathering. And when you have that information that says you just can't get there, that's time to really seriously consider a no bid.
Yeah. Yep. No, I like it. And I also think that the sooner you get to a no bid, the more opportunities you can look at potentially.
Sure. And your resources aren't tied up on
Yep.
something that you may not bid.
Exactly. Yeah. The work in progress is easier to handle
Important.
for everybody down, in each one of those different streams. Yeah. I think really the way that the proposal ops team, which includes the solution architects, in my opinion anyway, the proposal ops team works with the BD capture team, works with the delivery teams, the culture between those 3 teams, and the communication and the touch points and really the directives from leadership on how those 3 teams work together is indicative of how much you can win.
Yep, I agree. I completely agree with you on that point. I would say that the solution architect is part of the capture team rather than the proposal team, although very much involved in the proposal. But you want to have your solution baked and done before the RFP comes out, so that then you can validate it against the final RFP. Again, if the company can afford those resources, it's ideal to have the solution architect as part of the capture team.
Right. Yeah. I was kind of thinking about the capture team as one person, but yeah.
Yeah, I think of capture as probably could be a half a dozen people, but sometimes it's only one. But yeah.
I've had the good fortune of working with some pretty big companies, never working for one, but, working with them. And so I was, a small business, kind of like watching the big business and how they do it. And it was actually pretty impressive to see them take on some of those $400, $500 million deals, and the rigor, the structure, their step reviews, who attends, how it flows. It's pretty fast.
Yeah. Some of the big companies have it right, and they've got a process, and it's repeatable, and it's just a really good thing. Some of the other big companies do process for process sake, and you're checking a box, and to get to a gate review, you have to do these 5 things.
Right.
But it may or may not be part of the capture activities that you should really be doing as part of your research. And so while I think that there are a lot of companies out there that have it right and do it very well, there are some that need some help as well. Just my opinion.
Yeah, hot take. So I think this is going to be like my last super tactical question, but let me go to this other question I have ready for you. Canned question. Tell us a story of when capture went really well, like perfectly right, and tell us when it didn't go so well.
Sure. I think to set that up, it's important for people to understand that capture should happen whether you have 2 years or 2 months. You may not be able to complete all of the activities, but you should gather as much information as you can to make good decisions. So for capture to go really well, a good example, this is an example of one of my clients that I consulted with. We had all of the right people and roles in place. And it wasn't that we had different people for every role. Some people were, dual-hatted, but I, as the capture manager, could go to the solution architect, the proposal manager, the program manager, and get the information that I needed. And I was able to we did a very, very detailed capabilities matrix in which all of the people, the solution architect, the program manager, everybody weighed in and said, yep, we can do this. No, we can't do this. And based on that, we identified teammates. We brought the teammates on. The teammates knew the customer and knew the competitors. We were able to do a detailed competitive analysis, and everything just went smoothly. RFP came out. There were no surprises in the RFP. We just, moved along and we won the work. I mean, it wasn't anything magical that made it go well. It was the fact that all of the pieces went well and we could do all of the activities without major roadblocks. So that's good.
Right.
Capture, going poorly or just kind of nightmare is when, as a consultant, you go in and the RFP's coming out in less than a month and they want you to do capture. And you say, well, I can find out who the competitors are going to be. Have you done a capabilities matrix? Do you
Right.
know where and so it's always very challenging to when, especially companies call Red Team all the time.
Yeah.
And say, RFP came out yesterday, we need a proposal manager. Okay, our RFP is expected in a month, we need a capture manager. We can help you. We can help you get as far as we can, which is better than nothing. And I'm not saying, don't give up, don't not do it. Don't just wait till the RFP comes out, but it's very challenging to get all the information you need within a month period of time of when the RFP is going to be released. So that's kind of a tough hill to climb.
I think that also goes back to the lack of a BD person. You should have your pipeline filled out a year in advance.
Mm-hmm.
Have at least the general idea of the opportunities and where you're going and what you're doing. And I guess that matters to the strategy.
Yeah, a lot of companies we're working with aren't even talking about 2024 deals anymore.
Exactly.
They're coming and they're going to do them, but when they're talking about their pipeline, they're talking about 2025.
Exactly. Yep, I hear that. One kind of not off topic question, but a little bit sideways question here is, I guess 2 more questions. The first one is Black Hat reviews. Do you feel like, I kind of thought Black Hat reviews back when I was doing a lot of NASA proposals, because the mission suitability plan is so big and it's weighted so heavily. The Black Hat intel kind of like rigor was really important if you wanted to win. But I see some of the other agencies, if their riddle is a little bit different, weighted heavily on other items. I feel like Black Hat, like really strategic Black Hat intel, has kind of fallen by the wayside. What do you think?
I agree with you. I think a lot of companies are moving toward detailed competitive intelligence. And the competitive intelligence, there's actually, when we do a SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, we do a SWOT for our competitors and we do a SWOT for the customer as well. You do customer intelligence gathering and competitive intelligence gathering rather than the traditional Black Hat. I think the traditional Black Hat sessions, everybody calls them old school now, they would take days at a time and you would prepare and then you would sit in a conference room spending an entire day going through what information we had about how this competitor was going to bid, etc. And then you'd take another full day to debrief. And then all of that information would be summarized.
As we draw the curtain on today's chapter of GovCom Unfiltered, I want to thank you for joining us on this remarkable journey through the intricate world of federal contracting. I'm Alexa Choi, and it's been an honor to navigate these stories of courage, innovation, and resilience with you. Until we meet again, keep pushing boundaries, exploring new horizons, and making your mark in the government contracting universe. Farewell for now, but not forever. Stay tuned for more adventures that await in the next episode of GovCom Unfiltered. Safe travels on your path to greatness, and remember, we are all on this journey together.